Carl Jung once spoke about a change in human nature so intense that he called it one of the most disturbing things he had ever seen. It wasn't about violence, madness, or crime. It was about people we least expect, empaths, the gentle souls, who carry everyone else's pain. Jung discovered that behind their kindness there was something waiting to wake up. They looked soft, almost fragile, but when pushed too far, something inside them snapped. This change wasn't weakness breaking down, it was hidden strength rising up. Jung realized that the moment an empath stops being silent and starts trusting their own perception, they become one of the most powerful forces in psychology. In his clinic at Zurich, Jung met many empaths who seemed broken when they first arrived. They carried the weight of other people's anger, betrayal, and dysfunction. Some had grown up with alcoholic parents, others with unfaithful partners, or families full of conflict. They all had one thing in common. They blamed themselves and kept apologizing for simply existing. On the surface, they looked like victims who had been crushed by life. But Jung noticed something strange. These people weren't just suffering, they were also watching. They had been quietly studying human behavior for years, memorizing every small detail about the people who hurt them. Instead of chaos, their minds worked like hidden maps of emotions and patterns. Jung realized he was not just looking at victims. He was face to face with people who had the potential to understand human psychology more deeply than most trained experts. What shocked Jung the most was how empaths used their minds. They didn't only feel pain, they recorded it. Every insult, every betrayal, every hidden look of anger was stored with perfect detail. They knew their abusers' triggers, their fears, even their secret insecurities. It was like they carried a private notebook inside their minds, a kind of war room where every emotional pattern was organized with precision. When Jung tested them, the results left him speechless. Within minutes, empaths could notice childhood wounds, relationship struggles, or hidden fears in strangers they had never met before. This wasn't magic or psychic power. It was awareness, deep, sharp awareness that most people ignore. What others call intuition, empaths knew as data. They didn't guess, they observed. And when the day came that they finally used this gift, the results were powerful enough to change everything. Jung discovered that the breaking point for empaths was almost always betrayal. Not just a small lie or mistake, but betrayal from the very person they trusted most. It could be a partner's infidelity, a friend's manipulation, or a family member's hidden deception. For years, the empath had noticed the signs but ignored them, choosing love and loyalty over suspicion. They carried the weight silently, blaming themselves and trying harder to keep the relationship alive. But then came what Jung called the clarity event. This was the moment when all the patterns they had seen but denied became impossible to ignore. Instead of exploding in rage or collapsing in tears, the empath grew calm, unnaturally calm. In that silence, they stepped into a new version of themselves. They were no longer victims absorbing pain. They became sharp, precise, and unshakable, ready to face the truth they had always known deep inside. Jung explained this transformation as something he called shadow integration. For empaths, it was the moment when their hidden strength finally joined with their sensitivity. All the intelligence, all the intuition, all the suppressed power they had been taught to ignore suddenly became part of who they were. Instead of apologizing for their feelings, they began to trust them. Instead of excusing bad behavior, they started exposing it with calm precision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Empaths stopped being afraid of their own awareness and began to use it as a guide. Jung noticed that once this shift happened, there was no going back. These people didn't return to pleasing everyone or doubting themselves. They became whole, what he called psychologically complete. For the first time, they stood strong in both kindness and power, and that made them impossible to manipulate ever again. After this awakening, the lives of empaths began to change in remarkable ways. They no longer stayed in abusive relationships or toxic family systems. Instead of creating emotional drama, they walked away with quiet certainty. They rebuilt their lives step by step, choosing healthier connections and protecting their energy. Jung described this as becoming selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but only for those who truly deserved it. What surprised him most was how their presence alone unsettled others. People who had once controlled or manipulated them suddenly felt nervous in their company. They couldn't explain why, but they sensed something had changed forever. At the same time, genuine people felt safer and more understood than ever before. The empath's transformation didn't just heal their own life, it reshaped every relationship around them. As Jung followed these transformed empaths, he realized their new strength reached far beyond personal healing. They began to succeed in areas where they had once struggled. In business, they could sense what clients truly needed before a word was spoken. In relationships, they could identify unhealthy patterns instantly and walk away before damage was done. Their decisions became clearer, faster, and more effective because they trusted their own perceptions without hesitation. Jung described them as living truth detectors. Manipulators could no longer fool them because every hidden intention was visible. What unsettled Jung most was that this ability made them almost unstoppable. Perfect empathy combined with strategy meant they could influence people as easily as they had once been influenced. But instead of using this gift to harm, most chose to live with wisdom, clarity, and quiet strength. Jung noticed that this transformation didn't happen randomly. It followed clear stages, almost like steps in a hidden journey. The first stage was recognition. This was when the empath finally admitted that their sensitivity was not weakness but intelligence. They stopped doubting themselves and began to trust what they felt and saw. The second stage was integration. Here they brought together both sides of themselves, the gentle, caring nature and the sharp, analytical mind. They became complete, able to show kindness to those who deserved it and firm boundaries to those who didn't. The third stage was application. Now they used their awareness not just to defend themselves but to shape their lives with purpose. They could read situations and people with clarity, avoiding traps before they appeared. And the final stage was a return to service. Instead of turning cold, these awakened empaths used their strength to help others grow, becoming guides for people who were still trapped in silence. While Jung admired the strength of these awakened empaths, he also felt uneasy. He understood that such deep psychological insight could be dangerous if used without ethics. An empath who had fully integrated their shadow could see through people so clearly that they could also control and manipulate with ease. This raised a troubling question. What would happen if someone chose to use this power for harm instead of healing? Jung knew the possibility was real, which is why he never published all of his findings. He feared that if the wrong people learned how to trigger this transformation, it could be turned into a weapon. Instead, he kept his notes scattered across private journals, guarding the knowledge closely. For Jung, the ethical use of this gift was what separated an awakened empath from a potential manipulator. In his later writings, Jung described these transformed empaths as balanced warriors. They were gentle when it was safe to be gentle, but unshakable when someone tried to cross their boundaries. Unlike before, they no longer sacrificed themselves to keep others comfortable. They had learned to love without losing themselves. Jung believed this was more than just healing. It was evolution. These empaths could feel everything without being destroyed by it, and they could see everything without turning bitter or cynical. To Jung, they represented the next step in human development, people who combined deep sensitivity with unbreakable strength. His final warning was clear. Never underestimate someone who has learned to trust their perceptions completely. Once an empath reaches this stage, they are no longer victims. They are forces of nature, awake, aware, and impossible to control. Jung's final insight about empaths was both beautiful and unsettling. He realized that their journey was never about becoming less sensitive. It was about becoming consciously sensitive, learning to use their awareness as power instead of carrying it as a burden. What once made them feel weak now became their greatest strength. Jung wrote that the tragedy of empaths is not their sensitivity, but how long they wait to honor it. Once they stop doubting themselves, they become untouchable. They can no longer be manipulated, silenced, or broken, because they finally see the truth of who they are. In the end, Jung left us with a question that still echoes today. When the empath finally snaps, will they direct their power with wisdom, or let life direct it for them? The answer, he believed, decides not only the future of the empath, but perhaps the future of human psychology itself.